I have been working in user-centered design stroke UX for about 20 years, possibly too long, since before it was known as UX. But this talk tonight is based on a conversation that I had a few months ago with Elise in the audience, where we spoke about qualitative research and how that can be used in the field of CRO. It's also a kind of a reflection on two tribes really, because I know that CRO happens, but in all the UX type jobs I've been working on, I have never sat down and worked with a CRO team. So it looks at kind of process as well. So this is my possibly naive, possibly ignorant view of what I think optimizing is. It's about measuring, comparing, looking at analytics, and with a view to driving down to making products better, which is exactly what we do in UX. But I think the key thing on this slide is that convergent idea, and I think that's what optimization is about. However, as a designer, I have a kind of a reaction against that, and particularly when it comes to using analytics. I know it's critical, I know it's useful, but there are drawbacks to that. So the classic thing is, it gives you the what, but it doesn't give you the why. I see it in my head, I see analytics as like little footprints going over the website, which tell you a lot. You can see which direction people are going in. You can probably tell how fast they were walking. You can tell how many they were. You can tell when they came to your site. And all of that stuff is great, but it kind of decontextualizes the data. What it lacks is anything to do with the emotion. It lacks the passion. You don't know anything about the people who made those footprints. So if you take the possibly laboured footprint analogy one step further, if you draw back from the data and take a kind of a higher level view, if you start to look at the type of shoe that made the footprint, you can make different inferences from the data. If you go even further and start to look at the people who are wearing the boot and where they're using them, so if you look at the first, I don't know, just pick one, pick the Rambler, you know everything that the footprints themselves tell you. You know the direction they went in, but you also know, you can see that this person is walking in bad weather, craggy environments, possibly lost, which as a designer gives you a whole different set of insight to work to. And I think the sort of point that I decided, or that I came to when I was putting these slides together, is that I think there's scope there for optimizing type folk as well, and I guess for product folk, in that it gives you the possibility to expand your views. Kind of summarized in this slide, which is where as designers in doing user research, what you want to do is get away from narrowing down and you want to widen up your view. You need to keep an open mind, and the tagline at the bottom there, which looks the same, it's about making better products, which is subtly but importantly different to making products better, because it's changing the scope. So an example of drawing back and looking at how you can create a kind of divergent insight. This is a genuine note. It's one of mine. I think this is when I was working on the Screwfix project, which was a kind of optimization project. We were trying to get the basket to work better. We were trying to work out why people were dropping out. So we did tons of user testing. I think all told, we probably spoke to about 20 plumbers. And this is one insight. This is something that I scribbled down in the observation room. It didn't look like that at all. He didn't have a football for a head. It was male, which is kind of irrelevant. But the key stuff is that in chatting to the person, going off script, just talking about how he used the Screwfix in his life, he mentioned that he uses the basket not to buy stuff, but he uses it to collate all the products that he needs for a job, and then he uses that for building a quote, which is kind of gold really. That gives you a whole new insight into the basket. I mean, that's a reason for someone dropping out right there, and it's a good reason. But as designers, that gives you a whole different view on what that basket does. And you can immediately start imagining different things that you could do in that basket, which would be great for anyone in the trade. And Screwfix as a brand is for the trade. The next point, he maintains a spreadsheet for prices, which is basically a pain in the neck. But we could potentially do that. So that's another avenue of product that you could look at designing. And it just came from one chance comment from one person out of 50, which is a key point that I'll go back to. This is another example. This is from Nationwide. Again, it's just a chance comment. I said Nationwide, I haven't got their permission, so I hope there's no one from Nationwide here. If you're a bank, for instance, looking at launching a new product for young people, let's say, then you may decide that you need to change your tone of voice, that you need to come up with a whole language, a whole new product, which is pitched for the age group you're targeting. Seems to make perfect sense. And if you do a load of user testing with people from that age group, they will probably respond in kind. However, if you speak to someone down the pub who's got young children about how they will do their banking, you get a chance comment like this, which just says, my kid's 8, he doesn't care. And that's the truth, which you don't always get from user testing or from sort of projecting your own impressions on your intended audience. So to contextualize that insight, just a little piece of context at the bottom, saying what the insight means. And the reason I'm putting these two slides up is because there is a difference between insight and evidence. At some point, some manager somewhere will say, where's the research which says X? And if you're just working on one piece of a chance comment, which came from one person out of 50, and they're used to dealing with analytics, say, which deals with 5,000 respondents, there's a disconnect there. The insight can be good, but you need to track your evidence. You need to be able to stand behind your decisions. And it also implies a particular responsibility on the person doing the research. I've put applies different lenses, i.e. there's a democratization of UX that's going on, and the research role has become much more discrete, and people with a research background can come in and do great research. But I think that there's great benefit to be had from having someone doing research, for instance, who has a design background, because they instantly have a different idea on what questions might be useful, and they can see opportunities. And if you just give someone a script and you stick to the script, you're limiting your opportunities. Whereas if you've got someone who is confident enough to go off script, then you can turn those sort of mere observations into actual insight. Which brings us on to, I don't know how I'm doing for time. One of the things that I spoke about with Elise was the importance of personas. And it was a bit of a rant for me at the time, because I'd been in several places in succession where personas had been done very badly, which I think is there's a risk of devaluing the methodology. And I've seen personas on the wall here at Move, so I'm not speaking about no, I'm sure they're great. And I'm not using this even as an example of a great persona. It's just that it's a genuine one. This was actually one that we used to make genuine decisions from, and that's one of the points that I wanted to make about personas. Is they shouldn't just be wallware, which goes up as UX theatre to demonstrate that personas have been done and are then just ignored, which I see, and typically that happens if personas are built without genuine research behind them, then they're just going to die on the wall. They'll sit there, they'll probably end up in the bin, they will sit with the pile of unused post-its, end of. But if you can build personas based on actual research and built on genuine insight, ideally worked out as a group with the key stakeholders involved so that everyone is involved in the creation of the persona, and then it becomes something that you can use as a decision-making tool. So in this example, the stuff on the left with notes, that was turned into a storyboard, much more visual. I guess, this was about 10 years ago now. The sort of thing that's happening on the left would actually now be an experience map, I think, which has become a fairly common tool. Stuff on the right is an aggregation of different people, different demographics, but with the same basic goals from the company. And it speaks about stated goals, but also the kind of unstated goals. So it says somewhere that this person wants a better system for reporting metrics so that training funds can be allocated. And in this case, it's that "so that" which is critical. This was for a IT logistics company, whatever that means, and we had 5 or 6 personas built. And again, this is one of the themes from the conversation with Elise, where we were speaking about the idea of optimizing content so that it's not just working for one user group. If you've identified different user groups, then you naturally want to be able to upsell and to cross-refer to different content. And if you speak to some clients, the supposition is that that implies a different information architecture, different navigation, or some sort of personalization where content is hidden from some people and surfaced to others. The approach we took here was that regardless of what your particular role is or your user group, at any one time, a particular chunk of content may be relevant to you. So on the left, what we've got is this is the navigation, that's the information architecture. That's stable and solid. You can browse that as anyone and it will make sense. But the point we were making, so these are the different user groups, they will each have their own narrative, and each of these blobs indicates that their kind of primary narrative would be those blobs which we can feed them. And I think you can instantly see that with that stable information architecture at the bottom, you've got an opportunity to point people to a different cell if there's content there that we know they will need, either based on the research that the UXer has done, or at this stage, and this is where I think it sort of gets interesting as well, at this stage you can start feeding in analytics data, machine learning or AI even, to start predicting where these people may want to go. But going back to my original slide where we were talking about analytics being a conversion thing, I think that's one of the things that scares me about some of the machine learning that I've seen being done in some other places, which is it's all on that conversion idea. It's limiting, whereas it should be, I think it should be a balance between limiting and directing people to stuff, but also understanding their human needs so that you don't just get caught in that filter bubble. You know, the Netflix filter bubble, for instance, which I really hate. So this is a representation of that brought to the page, and this just shows, this is an aggregation of user journeys, and you've got navigation coming down from the top, which shows DIA, but the point here is that we've got all this space here to use to suggest content to folk. And this was actually, this was kind of, it was kind of adaptive in that it was a combination of looking for what you searched for, which drove what would come to the surface, and then based on what we anticipated your user group would be, then we could just feed the onward journey on. And the idea was that if you're in one of these journeys, at each page we've got scope to pull you or to throw you into one of the others if that was relevant. And that worked. I think I'm sort of coming to the end. The final point that I wanted to make, am I still okay for time? There is all the stuff that I've spoken about, all the research and persona building, typically happens over here. This is the Design Council Double Diamond. I don't know how many of you would be familiar with this. It's been around since 2005. But with the sort of, with the advent of service design and the focus on digital transformation, the Double Diamond has made a bit of a resurgence and it's used as a typical design process, which I think is, you know, it fits and it works, and it indicates that the research that happens here, which fits with the opening up, and then you've got 2 phases of convergence, which happens here and here. And I've gone through this cycle, I don't know how many times, and like I said at the start, I've never sat down with a CRO team, which I think kind of looks more like this at the moment. This may be wrong, but to me it seems like optimization happens post-release, and it seems like you're caught within this narrow definition of product, where what you want to be doing is something more like this. So it's like we're proposing a triple diamond model where you don't just have two diamonds and it doesn't end at release. That release just implies a whole other diamond of work where you can broaden your scope, ideally referring back to the qualitative research that was done, so you've got a feel for the humans that you're speaking to. And perhaps even more ideally, it would be this, where it's still double diamond, but everyone working together. So maybe that's a thought. That's it. Thank you.